Part 11. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 101. Hearing this, Zuyun couldn't help but trembled, with an incredible look in his eyes. Of course he remembers. How many people have you killed, what level you are at? How could he have forgotten that? However, he couldn't connect Sun Qiniang to those three people at all. Sun Qiniang said that she had killed her two brothers, so she was the third sister who had been sitting in the carriage with her for most of the day. Aren't you dead? And, how did you become such a little girl? Zuyun asked in shock. Sun Qiniang answered the question inappropriately, so, is it a mortal enemy? Zuyun's face darkened and he said, you are still alive because you are lucky. Hearing this, Sun Qiniang became excited and said loudly, do you mean that my brother's death was in vain? You wanted to rob me first, don't think I don't know, Zuyun said. The scene at that time appeared in his mind, you are sending a secret signal by tapping your fingers on the wooden edge of the carriage. I deliberately pretended sleeping actually allows you to relax your vigilance. You. Sun Qiniang looked surprised. Although he has the body of a little girl, he has actually lived for decades. But Zuyun's father is immortal, only 40 years old. How could Zuyun be so sophisticated? Snort. Zuyun snorted coldly and said, if you are not as skilled as others, you will die if you die. Since you survived the catastrophe, it stands to reason that you will have good fortune in the future. With your single-line ice spirit root, if you concentrate on cultivating it, you will surely have a broad path to immortality in the future. Those who kill will always be killed. Since you are a robber, how could you not know that one day you will fail? Sun Qiniang was speechless. How could she not understand this truth? But her brother's death has shrouded her like a shadow for a long time. She wanted to break through this shadow, so she pretended that Zuyun didn't know. When she killed Zuyun, it would be equivalent to avenging herself, and her mind would be clear and she would naturally succeed in cultivation. But at this time, Zuyun revealed their evil intentions that day and then fought back. The shadow in her heart turned into dark clouds and thunder and lightning, violently bombarding her heart. She held her head violently and shook it wildly, unable to accept this obvious fact. Don't talk about your two brothers, even you died innocently. Zuyun turned a blind eye and continued, do you know why I go to sacrifice that senior brother Zhang once a year? Sun Qiniang raised her head, her eyes stained with tears, but her eyes were dull. Zuyun suddenly took out a cup of spiritual wine from his arms and threw it to the ground. With a bang, the wine splashed out, and the light fragrance overflowed. Smelling this familiar smell, Sun Qiniang suddenly seemed to remember something. If I really want to say it, that's my biggest revenge. What kind of revenge do you think this is? Zuyun shouted coldly, Senior brother Zhang, his name is Tianyuan. Do you remember? No. No. How do you know it was us who killed Zhang Tianyuan? Sun Qiniang stood up suddenly, teetering for a while, and suddenly fell to the ground again. Her magical weapon was destroyed, she was seriously injured, and her weak point was hit by Zuyun one after another. How could she still withstand it? Senior brother Zhang, he is the one who guides me on my way to immortality. Zuyun's tone slowed down and he spoke like a memory, I would have been trapped on the cliff, and would have starved to death if I didn't fall to death. It was senior brother Zhang who rescued me. I have 5 spiritual roots. I won't be led into the immortal sect no matter where I am. It was senior brother Zhang who took me to the spirit sword sect. If Qin Liken informed the elders to accept disciples, I would be nothing more than a handyman in Lingjian section. It was senior brother Zhang who brought me into Sun Suan Hua's sect. I have many difficulties in cultivation, but senior brother Zhang went out to hunt for treasures for me. In the end, because of a pot of spiritual wine, you had evil intentions and thought of killing. It was senior brother Zhang who worked hard to send the found things to the sect and asked Qin Lycan to hand them over to me. At the end of the sentence, I almost shouted. Tell me, if you kill someone who is so kind to me, is it a mortal grudge? These words were like a wake-up call, awakening the self-deceived Sun Qiniang and driving away her vitality. Sun Qiniang lay on the ground, tears welling up in her eyes. It flowed down both sides of the cheeks, wetting the messy hair on the temples and the soil under the body. She was hopeless. That's all. I have killed all three of you once. The grudge has been resolved. You can go back to Lingjian section. Suddenly, Zuyun spoke in a calm voice, as if he was talking about an ordinary thing. Sun Qiniang murmured, what's the use of returning to Lingjian sect? Zuyun snorted coldly and said sarcastically, you are a single-line ice spirit root and a direct disciple of Lin Zhenyang, the leader of the spirit sword sect. Her future is limitless. Lin Zhenyang spent a lot of effort and did not hesitate to kill people to silence them, even to kill Qin Lycan. Hiding it from the entire sect. Why don't you go back? Sun Qiniang's tone was still weak, Lin Zhenyang, he's dead. But this sound, to Zuyun's ears, was like thunder in his heart. What did you say? Lin Zhenyang is dead. He ran away to escape the potential threats from Lin Zhenyang and Mu Huhui. Yes. Mu Huhui is also dead. Are you telling the truth? Zuyun took a breath, his face full of disbelief. Is there any benefit for me to lie to you? Isn't it because you escaped from Lingjian sect because they died? Sun Qiniang suddenly felt strange that Zuyun suddenly returned to the mountain to look for his father. Couldn't it be that he felt that the Lingjian sect had no hope of coming to visit relatives? With this thought, his whole body seemed to come alive, and his body gained a little more strength. Although he was still haggard, he could manage to hold himself up. You do not know. Her eyes gradually regained their luster, and she looked at Zuyun and asked. I have no idea. And you? Do you know that Lin Zhenyang accepted me as his disciple? Zuyun asked with a snort. Sun Qiniang nodded. At that time, Lin Zhenyang was talking about this matter, and a fight started on the side of Majian Cliff. Firstly, he wanted to use me to see if he could exchange some elixirs from Wanjian Mountain for him to cultivate. Secondly, he wanted to trap me there so that he could keep the secret that you are Binglingan. Sun Qiniang was non-committal and stretched out 3 more fingers and said, the third one is for you to be my sparring partner so that I can improve my strength. Zuyun was greatly surprised. Sun Qiniang took the initiative to answer the question, which seemed a little different. Looking carefully, I found that the dark light in her eyes was flowing and full of life. Seeing Zuyun staring at her like this, Sun Qiniang dodged her eyes and said, Zuyun, Lin Zhenyang also wants to use me. Although you say you won't kill me, I can't let you let me go in vain. Zuyun couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face and said, tell me about it. Sun Qiniang said calmly, Lin Zhenyang wants me to improve my strength as soon as possible, not in exchange for the elixir from Wanjian Mountain, but because he wants me to take him to the century-old secret realm in Yeazhu. What? He knows too. Zuyun was shocked. He learned about the centuries-old secret realm from Atang. Unexpectedly, Lin Zhenyang also knew. Although he had no intention of going. But even the people in Yunzhou want to try it. Is there really some rare treasure in it? What you said, you also know. Sun Qiniang was even more surprised than Zuyun. It was not surprising that he learned from Lin Zhenyang that during the foundation building period, Lin Zhenyang was also the master of a sect. Although Yeazhu is far away, it is not out of reach. On the contrary, Zuyun. I know, but I have no intention of going. Zuyun shook his head and said. I still want to find Ergu. Sun Qiniang said strangely, you just said that monks compete for immortality, but here is the opportunity to compete for immortality, why don't you go? This has nothing to do with you. Zuyun shook his head, took out another bottle of nourishing elixir and threw it over, saying, since you and I have no grudges, that's all. Take this medicine, I'm leaving. Sun Qinyang looked at the nourishing pill beside her, then at Zuyun, and suddenly said, coward. Zuyun paused, then turned around and said, even people from Yunzhou want to go, let alone people from Yezhou. There are many people, and there are many disputes. I, Zuyun, am not a coward, but I am self-aware. What kind of self-awareness? It's just cowardice. Sun Qinyang suddenly laughed out loud, but was quickly interrupted by a cough. After regaining her breath, she said, I just don't dare. What's the reason? Humph, whatever you want. Zuyun walked to Zurong and saw Zurong looking at him up and down. He couldn't help but touch his nose and said, Dad, why are you looking at me like this? Son, how old are you this year? Zuyun was stunned and said with a smile, Dad, don't you know how old I am? You brat, Zurong cursed, and then said, you are 12 years old this year, but after what you just said, you are like a boy of 17 or 18 years old, no, more than a 20-year-old youth. Zuyun was stunned, but smiled and said nothing. A wise son is better than a father. Coupled with the time in Diwu's glass mirror, isn't it true that he has not yet reached the age of 17? As for why he is like this, isn't it because of the insidiousness and cunning in the world of immortality? Dad, you almost scared your son by talking like this. You want to find a wife for your son? Zuyun said with a smile. Before Zurong spoke, he heard Sun Qinyang suddenly shout, Zuyun, if you don't dare, I will accompany you to the secret realm. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 102. Zuyun frowned slightly. Sun Qinyang was too ignorant. He stopped and looked back, saying, even if I go, I don't need you to accompany me. Sun Qinyang swallowed a few essence-nourishing pills, calmed down a little, and said, although I don't know why you cultivate the 5 spirit roots so fast, but you have been hiding in Yunzhou, can you build the foundation? Zuyun laughed dumbly, whether I can build a foundation or not has nothing to do with you. Sun Qinyang was able to stand up now. She held onto the tree trunk beside her and gasped slightly, I can build the foundation, and then find the foundation building elixir for you. Then we can go into the secret realm together, how about it? From accompanying Zuyun before, to accompanying him together. Zuyun heard something different. However, what interested him most was that Sun Qinyang actually had a foundation establishment pill. Where did your foundation establishment pill come from? Sun Suanhua told him that the foundation establishment pill could increase the success rate of Qi refining monk's foundation establishment to over 80%. But some people with extraordinary talents can succeed naturally when they reach a certain level. Zuyun didn't think he had much talent, but he knew he could succeed in building a foundation. The more his realm improves, the more terrifying he feels about the 5 spiritual roots. Stable, terrifyingly stable. Of course Lin Zhenyang bought it from Nanfangfang Market and gave it to me when he returned to Lingjian section. Sun Qinyang took out the porcelain bottle from her arms and said, what do you think? Zuyun narrowed his eyes and said, is it possible that I'm waiting for you to build a foundation? What if you build a foundation and want to kill me? I won't kill you. Sun Qinyang suddenly became anxious and said, our mortal enemy has been resolved. How can I kill you without any grudges or reasons? Zuyun sneered and said, don't you kill senior brother Zhang without any grudge? Well, I won't go with you. If we meet in Yezhou in the future, we will be strangers. If you treat me badly again, if you have evil thoughts, I will still kill you. After saying that, Zuyun turned around and took Zurong's hand, walking towards Barren Rock Mountain. No matter how Sun Qinyang shouted from behind, he never looked back. It wasn't until Zuyun's figure disappeared that she gritted her teeth and stamped her feet, cursing and saying, "Since you don't believe me so much, then I will find the Foundation establishment pill and send it to you." She had no spiritual power at this time and could not catch up with Zuyun. She could only wait until her injuries recovered, then she sat cross-legged on the ground and began to practice qi. When Zuyun and Zurong returned home, Sun Qiniang also got up and left. She took a deep look in the direction of Barren Rock Mountain and said, "I will come back." Then he slowly left somewhere. At this time, in the small courtyard, a middle-aged man was dozing off. When he heard the sound of footsteps, he opened his eyes suddenly. "Ha ha, Laozu, Xiaozu. Why did you come back? If I hadn't been here to watch, your food would have been ruined." It was Ergu's father who spoke. When he saw Zuyunde leaving, he thought that there was no one here, and if he kept the firewood burning under the stove, the rice in the pot would be burned. "Thank you, Uncle Joe," Zuyun said with a smile. Zurong said a few words to him casually and politely allowed him to eat. But Uncle Joe said he had food at home, so he went back. In the small courtyard, only Zurong and his son were left. "Son, what are your plans next?" "That little girl?" Zuyun asked with a sad look on his face. He was really afraid that Zuyun would kill someone in front of him. After all, he is still immortal. How can he accept his son killing a girl who looks 6 or 7 years old? "Dad, ignore her, there's something wrong with her brain." Zuyun cursed and said, "I plan to stay in the barren stone mountain for a few years." Zurong looked happy at first, but then shook his head and said, "Son, they all say that those who cultivate immortality must cut off the mortal world, otherwise it will affect their cultivation. You, better go. That girl can fly, in fact, what she said is not bad. If you two get together, you can also take care of me." Zuyunkai said, "Dad, aren't you afraid that girl will stab your son in the back?" "Isn't she unable to beat you?" Zurong said, "You have never understood that it is better to dissolve enemies than to make enemies. That's why when you were in the mountains, no one else would play with you except Big Dog and 2 dogs. You were still young at that time. Dad thinks you will understand when you are older. And Dad is still in the village, and he can control the relationship between neighbors, so he will let you do whatever you want. This girl can't beat you, but no matter how strong you are, there will always be someone you can't beat." Zuyun couldn't laugh or cry. Zurong's words actually made sense. "But that's just for mortals." He shook his head, and then said seriously, "Dad, my master escaped here from a very far away place. Do you know why?" "How do I know?" Zurong scolded while taking rice out of the pot. "If you have something to say, if you have nothing to eat, why are you still selling medicine out of a gourd?" Zuyun sighed, "Dad, my master was hunted to death by his son, he hid for 100 years, and it was only after he met me that he thought about going back." Zurong's hands froze, his face full of disbelief, and he said, "How is this possible?" Zuyun asked back, "What's impossible?" When the master and his son parted, he said that when we meet again in the future, if he is a mortal enemy, let me kill him without worrying about the relationship between master and disciple. Don't hold back. This. Zurong felt like the sky was falling and said in a trembling voice, "Once a teacher, always a father, you are going to kill your father like this. It's so treasonous and unethical." Zuyun said loudly, "Dad. Then tell me, if I don't kill him, he will kill me. Do you think my son should close his eyes and wait for death, or should he fight to survive?" The rice shovel in Zurong's hand fell directly to the ground. He turned to look at Zuyun and staggered back until he hit the wooden pillar of the shed and then stood a little more steadily. He stretched out his hand, pointed at Zuyun and said slightly, "You, get out. Get out. My old Zhu family, don't have anyone like you." After hearing this, the bright light in Zuyun's eyes suddenly became lonely. Originally, My father was proud of me as a monk, but now he wants to drive me away. He suddenly realized that he and his father were completely different from each other. Thinking of this, I suddenly understood something in my heart. Why do monks want to kill love? It's not that they are ruthless, but that they are at different levels, resulting in different conceptual understandings. Thinking of this, he thought clearly, fell to his knees with a plop, and kowtowed to Zhurong 3 times. "Dad, my son is gone." After saying that, he was so fierce that he took out his flying sword, stepped on it and rushed straight to the top of the mountain. He disappeared in an instant. At this time, another figure broke into the house in a panic. "Lao Zhu, what's wrong with you?" Xiao Zhu finally came back and had a good quarrel. "Old Zhou," Zhurong looked up at him and saw that he was still holding a big pottery bowl in his hand. He was obviously eating. He came to break up the argument when he heard it. "Forget it, let's not talk about it." Lao Zhou suddenly laughed and said, "Old Zhu, you usually have no one to talk to, but when you see Xiao Zhu, you act like your father. After all, Xiao Zhu is also an immortal master. He is a person who has seen the world. How can I get used to hearing this from you? Nagging words. In my opinion, it's better to find a wife." Zhurong glared at him angrily, but his expression relaxed again. "Yes, find a wife, I can still have a baby anyway, I'm afraid of a ball." Lao Zhou sat directly on the threshold of Zhurong's house with the rice in his hands and said, "It's easy to talk to your mother-in-law. Tomorrow my yellow-faced woman will go back to her parents' house and ask her to talk to you about your marriage. Just say that there is a fairy in your family. Master, I'm afraid there will be many people carrying the sedan to bring the girl over to you." Zhurong laughed. "Old Zhou, don't laugh at me. It would be great to have a widow." Lao Zhou winked and said, "Old Zhu, to tell you the truth, Xiao Zhu helped Urga bring back a lot of gold and silver to me. I don't believe Xiao Zhu didn't leave it for you. Of course, the yellow flower girl is joking, but find someone who knows how to live. Yes, my yellow-faced woman will definitely be fine." As soon as he finished speaking, a gloomy voice came from outside the house. "Okay, you surnamed Zhou, do you dislike me for being a yellow-faced woman?" Aunt Zhou was holding a rolling pin, her face full of clouds. Behind her, hiding a pretty little girl with a smile on her face, she looked up from time to time to look in the direction where Zuyun had just left. "Top cliff." Zuyun landed here and jumped down. Yunzhou is so big that there is no home anywhere. Since the Lingjian sect couldn't go, instead of finding another place, it would be better to end the matter in this cave. I don't know how long this hole has existed without being discovered, but at least it is safe here. On the other hand, it is not far from Barren Stone Mountain. If there is any accident, I can protect it secretly, which is convenient. Zuyun plans to continue practicing here for a few years. He walked straight into the cave, and then in a flash, he entered the Dewu glazed mirror. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 103. Every 5 days in the mirror, Zuyun would go out and take a look. He directly flew with his sword and looked down above the village for a moment. As long as he can see Zhurong, he will go back and continue practicing. What goes around comes around. After a conversation with Zhurong, he learned the real reason why the monk cut off the worldly bond, and he felt that his cultivation was faster. The worldly relationship is cut off, but it is not just heartless. Presumably there are so many monks in the world who only linger in the chi refining period throughout their lives, and they may have misunderstood the truth. One day, he saw the barren stone mountain village becoming lively. Another day, he saw a bright red scene in the village. 1 month passed, and he saw a graceful woman in his family. Half a year later, he saw that the woman's belly was slightly bulging. A year later, when he saw Zhu Rong holding a baby, he burst into tears with laughter. 2 years later, he saw the child toddling in the yard. 3 years later, the child was standing up short logs in the courtyard, waiting for Zhu Rong to chop them down. 4 years later, the child suddenly looked up and shouted excitedly into the room, "There is someone in the sky who can fly." Zhu Yun wiped the corners of his eyes and ran away. From then on, he devoted himself to training. Even if he occasionally appeared on camera, he would never go to Barren Rock Mountain to take another look. Zhu Rong has a new family, but he is still Zhu Rong's son. After 6 years outside the mirror, Zhu Yun's figure has gradually grown, and he is no different from an ordinary adult. But after 30 years in the mirror, he is truly young and mature. He also knew that he would eventually leave. Because he is already at the 12th level of Qi refining. I thought that by practicing the 5 Elements Chaos Sutra, he would be able to achieve a breakthrough naturally. But I never thought that I still overestimated my talent. In other words, the 5 Elements Chaos Sutra was overestimated. The bottleneck has been stuck for a year, and he needs to find new opportunities to break through the past. When he was leaving, he flew to the front door of his small courtyard. The half-brother was wielding a small axe and chopping firewood in a decent manner. He chuckled lightly, and just as he was about to leave, a girl in blue walked up from the foot of the mountain. Her steps were light and neither slow nor slow, and she looked like a monk at first glance. Although her aura was restrained and her strength was not obvious, Zhu Yun could tell at a glance that this girl's level was probably not weaker than his own. But according to the body shape and pace, it seems familiar. With a slight frown, the girl walked into the village and walked straight towards his home. Zhu Yun was puzzled, so he quietly descended a little and released his spiritual consciousness. At the 12th level of Qi refining, Zhu Yun's spiritual consciousness has reached 100 steps. "Girl, who are you looking for?" Zhu Rong's voice came from his spiritual consciousness. Zhu Yun had not heard it for almost 30 years. "Uncle Zhu, have you forgotten me?" A female voice sounded, as if she knew Zhu Rong. Zhu Rong shook his head and said, "Girl, I have lived in this village for a long time and don't go out much. How can I recognize you?" When he saw that the young girl called him Uncle Zhu, he was puzzled. "Uncle Zhu, I am Sun Qinyang. I came here today just to find Zhu Yun." "Sunday. Sun Qinyang? You are the little girl from 6 years ago." Zhu Rong's expression changed, and then he shook his head and said, "Zhu Yun sent me back here 6 years ago and left. He is not here." "Leaving?" Sun Qinyang was puzzled. From what she saw, the Zhu family's father and son had a deep love. Even if Zhu Yun was at the 8th level of Qi refining at that time, it was extremely unlikely that he would leave Yunzhou. Based on her understanding of Zhu Yun, she must be practicing in seclusion here. Firstly, you can take care of your home, and secondly, there are at least some brokers with poor cultivation here. Not dangerous at all. Yes, when we parted that day, he sent me home and left." Zhu Rong said loudly and protected his youngest son behind him, fearing that Sun Qinyang was coming to seek revenge. Seeing this, Sun Qinyang smiled and said, "Uncle Zhu, don't panic, the grudge between Qinyang and Zhu Yun has been resolved. Since they are not here, Qinyang can just leave." With that said, she turned around and left. When she saw a wooden table in the small courtyard, she suddenly stopped, took out some gold and silver from the storage bag, put it down, and then walked out of the courtyard. Zhu Yun secretly thought, the ghost of Sun Qinyang is still lingering. Does she really want to follow her? He withdrew his spiritual consciousness in confusion. If Sun Qinyang had made any move just now, he would not hesitate to take action. For the first 4 years, the reason why he came to visit every day was because he was afraid that Sun Qinyang would come to take revenge. After not seeing him for 4 years, and seeing that Zhu Rong had a happy life, he devoted himself to cultivation. I just didn't expect that Sun Qiniang would come when I planned to take one last look today. Suddenly coming back to his senses, he suddenly found that Sun Qiniang was no longer on the mountain road. I was startled, and there was a laughter like silver bells in my ears. Zhu Yun, I didn't expect you to have a penchant for peeping. Sun Qiniang, what do you mean? Zhu Yun looked up and saw Sun Qiniang looking at him with a smile. Under her feet was an ice blue flying sword. It's not interesting, I just want someone to go to Yeazhu with me to explore the secret realm. Sun Qiniang still used the same rhetoric. Zhu Yun snorted coldly, ignored it, and flew down the mountain with his sword. Zhu Yun, you can't get rid of me. Sun Qiniang hurriedly followed up, her speed was so fast that she didn't give in too much. Also, since both of them are at the 12th level of Qi refining, there won't be much difference in speed. It's just that the endurance depends on the amount of spiritual power in the Danshan. Over time, Zhu Yun will naturally get rid of him. The only difference is that Sun Qiniang has refined the sword into her own magic weapon, which is slightly better than Zhu Yun. Zhu Yun flew on his own, thinking that when Sun Qiniang was tired and couldn't catch up with him, he would go around and go far away. Anyway, he was not in a hurry to go to Yeazhu. Yunzhou was so big, and taking a look at it before going to Yeazhu was also a way to fulfill his childhood dream. In just a blink of an eye, Sun Qiniang stood side by side with Zhu Yun. She turned her head and looked at Zhu Yun provocatively and said, Zhu Yun, where are you going? Yunzhou is so big, I want to see it. Zhu Yun said expressionlessly. This is the truth, but Sun Qiniang obviously didn't believe it. She covered her mouth and laughed, you are flying towards the south. If you fly further, you will fly out of Yunzhou. Fly out of Yunzhou. Zhu Yun was stunned, but saw the endless blue color under the clouds in the distance. Then he remembered that the southeast side of Yunzhou was close to the sea. So Zhu Yun, don't lie to me, Sun Qiniang rolled her eyes and said, let me guess, 6 years ago you said you could break through the foundation building stage, but now you're out of the 12th level of Qi refining, and you're flying towards the south. Haha, you're going to the southern market to buy foundation building pills, right? Sun Qiniang suddenly clapped her hands and raised her voice. Zhu Yun said coldly, I'm just buying foundation building pills, so what? What does it have to do with you? It has nothing to do with me, but I heard that foundation building pills are in short supply here, and now they're in short supply. Sun Qiniang didn't get angry, she just followed Zhu Yun and talked. Don't you have foundation building pills? How do you know this news? Zhu Yun frowned and asked, 6 years ago she said she had broken through to the foundation building stage, and asked her to get one for herself. It's just that she didn't agree. And at this time, she hadn't taken the foundation building pills, so how did she know the situation in the southern market? It doesn't matter to me whether there is one or not. Zhu Yun looked towards the south again, then flew down on his sword. In front of him was the market. He remembered that flying was prohibited there, and he didn't want to cause trouble. Sun Qiniang still followed, and the two fell straight to the ground. Zhu Yun said dissatisfiedly, Sun Qiniang, why do you have to follow me? The road is open, this is not your house, I can go wherever I want, why do you care about me? Sun Qiniang said nonchalantly. Zhu Yun swallowed a qi combining pill and walked to the other side, intending to fly away directly after his spiritual power was fully restored. At this time, he no longer needed to sit cross-legged to refine. He only needed to distract himself a little to control it, and the medicinal power would turn into spiritual power and fill his danshan. This can be regarded as one of the gains in the mirror for decades. Sun Qiniang saw Zhu Yun with his back to her, and then she smiled bitterly. Zhu Yun didn't believe herself at all. But she had no choice. Who made her do something too much at the beginning? It is said that the deadly feud has been resolved, but I am afraid that Zuyun still has a grudge. Zuyun, you'd better not go to the southern market. Sun Qinyang wanted to leave, so she stopped following Zuyun and suddenly said. I said, it has nothing to do with you. Zuyun just turned around and heard a gloomy voice coming from the front. Hey, Tu Chi refining 12? Now, there are enough people. As soon as the voice fell, a terrifying might spread towards the side. Zuyun's pupils shrank, and he used his spiritual power to step back with the Changshengju footwork. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 104. Zuyun, you go first, I'll hold him back. Sun Qinyang's pretty face also showed a nervous look. She shouted and the ice blue sword in her hand immediately attacked. She stood up and stabbed, and a stream of ice energy shot out in the front, pointing directly to the direction where the sound came from. This is the sword energy of the sword control technique. This sword energy is not as powerful as Zuyun's gold spiritual power, but because of the mutant spiritual root, the power is not weak. The sword energy rushed towards him and quickly condensed into an ice sword. Huh! A suspicious voice came from the woods. Ordinary sword moves can actually release ice swords. This sword, I'm afraid it's a rare treasure. That person never thought that this was actually because of Sun Qinyang's ice spiritual root. It's no wonder that Yunzhou has always been poor. How could there be such a person who can be regarded as a genius in the entire Yejing? Zuyun was originally thinking about how to escape, but he never expected that Sun Qinyang would actually tell him to leave first. He was surprised and stopped. He also saw a figure emerging from the woods, holding a compass-like round magic weapon in his hand, and smashed the ice sword into pieces with a light smash. You dare to attack me at the foundation building stage with just the 12th level of Qi refining? Girl, you are not very old, but you are very brave. The man walked out of the woods, looking about 40 years old, with thick eyebrows raised and a face full of disdain. He was dressed in shorts, careless, and did not take the two of them seriously at all. But Zuyun sighed in his heart, it might not be so easy to leave now. Because the spiritual consciousness of the foundation building stage has already locked on both of them. Zuyun, are you stupid? Why don't you leave? Sun Qinyang scolded in a low voice, her face was very anxious. Zuyun's surprise faded away, and he said lightly, the speed of the foundation building stage is much faster than our Qi refining stage, so it's not that easy to run. Ha ha ha, the big man laughed, you are a self-aware young man. Follow me if you know what's good for you, maybe there is still a way to survive. If you don't know what's good for you, like this little girl, I will catch her first. As he said, he suddenly smiled obscenely, the master of the temple likes girls the most. This Qi refining 12th level has some strength to resist. Maybe the master will be so happy that he will reward me. After saying that, he threw the disc, drew a strange arc, and covered Sun Qinyang's head. Break it for me. Sun Qinyang saw the disc flying towards her, like a dark cloud covering the sky and the sun, trying to trap her in it. In a hurry, she condensed all her spiritual power on the sword and stabbed the disc directly. Keng. The round plate paused with a crisp sound, but Sun Qinyang flew backwards, with blood already flowing from the corner of her mouth. This round plate is the big man's life-size medium-grade magic weapon. Even if he hits it casually, it is not something Sun Qinyang can resist with all her strength. The ice blue sword in her hand was dim and damaged. But at this time, she didn't care about herself at all, but screamed and cursed, Zuyun, you still don't leave? Do you want me to die here in vain? The big man walked forward with a grim smile, facing Sun Qinyang, but said to Zuyun, I didn't expect this girl to be so affectionate to you. But you are sensible, and you can't leave. Stay and work for the market for 2 years, and you can survive. Zuyun had a blank expression on his face, but his thoughts were flying in his heart. The owner of the market, the owner again. At that time, Lao He said that those big ships on the seashore were to trick ordinary monks to go out to sea, and then force them to go to sea to search for treasures. At this time, the big man said that he was short of 2 12th level chi refining cultivators when they first met. I'm afraid he has big plans. Could it be that he found some treasure land in the sea? While thinking, he suddenly found that his spiritual consciousness had weakened a little. If it was an ordinary chi refining period, he would not notice this at all, because they themselves would not use spiritual consciousness, or they simply did not have spiritual consciousness. Like Sun Qinyang, she didn't know that once she was locked by spiritual consciousness, she would have no escape. Unless she had a great magical power to escape, she would escape from the spiritual consciousness range of the foundation building period in an instant. Zuyun's mind moved slightly, and he looked at the big man. He saw him turning his back to him and slowly walking towards Sun Qinyang, and he felt that the opportunity had come. He had not resisted all the time, which should have made the big man think that he had accepted his fate. And he put all his mind on Sun Qinyang, combined with what he just said. He should want to capture Sun Qinyang alive, so he would do this. Zuyun did not move, and took out a firebird talisman from his bosom and held it in his hand. This was drawn 6 years ago. He had already used up the intermediate talisman paper, and the most powerful means in his hand was only the firebird talisman. He also had only one chance to attack. If he failed, he would die. Raising his head slightly, Zuyun saw the big man following closely, slowly approaching Sun Qinyang. Although Sun Qinyang was not seriously injured, she was powerless to save the situation. Her eyes passed around the big man, full of resentment, and said, "Zuyun, why don't you run? If you run, you still have a chance, but if you stay, you will die." Zuyun still did not speak, but the big man stopped and said playfully, "Little girl, you seem to know a lot." "Of course I know a lot. Don't you want to listen?" As he spoke, Sun Qinyang suddenly laughed. The big man said in surprise, "Little girl, haven't you heard a saying? The more you know, the faster you die." Sun Qinyang showed no fear at all, and said to Zuyun across the big man, "Zuyun, in the past year, a wave of monsters suddenly appeared in the sea, and their strength is roughly higher than the 6th level of chi refining. After killing the monsters, you can get the monster's inner elixir, which is a good thing for cultivation. The owner of this market couldn't bear the casualties of his men, so he sent several foundation building cultivators to abduct chi refining cultivators to kill monsters for him. If you go, even if you survive, you will only be a tool for others, and you may die again at any time." Hearing these words, Zuyun finally understood why Sun Qinyang came to Huangshi Mountain to find him. She was afraid that he would go to buy foundation building pills and be captured by the foundation building cultivators in the market. So that's it? Zuyun sighed in his heart, he actually misunderstood Sun Qinyang. Thinking of this, he looked into Sun Qinyang's eyes and blinked. Sun Qinyang didn't understand, but finally turned her head to look at the big man. A trace of surprise flashed across the big man's face, and then he grinned and said, "Little girl, you do know a lot. But I still don't understand, why do you say it out? Aren't you afraid of death?" "Die," Sun Qinyang asked back, "if I don't die, will I be kept as a plaything for your master?" Zuyun's mind suddenly buzzed, and he instantly understood why Sun Qinyang did this. One is to seek death so as not to be humiliated, and the other is to tell him what he will do after being captured, so that he can be prepared in advance. The big man first looked at Sun Qinyang unexpectedly, and then sneered, "If I don't kill you, can you die?" Just as he finished speaking, he saw Sun Qinyang shouted, "Zuyun, go." At the same time, her spiritual power suddenly exploded, rushing towards the slightly damaged ice blue sword. The big man was shocked, This is to self-destruct his own life weapon. The 12th level of Qi refining, if he fights him alone, he can crush him to death with just one finger. But the self-explosion of the natal magic weapon is several times more powerful, and the physical strength of the foundation building period is only limited compared to that of ordinary people. How can he bear it? With great fear in his heart, he summoned a round plate and smashed it towards Sun Qiniang. As long as he smashed her to death, he could stop the self-explosion. But this also allowed Sun Qiniang to get what she wanted and avoid the consequences of humiliation. At this time, Zhu Yun also moved. How could he ignore Sun Qiniang's treatment of him? He couldn't let him die. Qiniang, stop! Zhu Yun shouted loudly, and at the same time thrust his sword forward. The same sword energy was released, but it burst out with the same power as the foundation building period. The gold spiritual power was drained at this moment, and the big man's hair stood up, and he forced to dodge. His natal magic weapon also lost control and smashed off at this time, barely brushing Sun Qiniang's body and hitting the ground. A loud bang sounded, the ground shook, and mud smoke rose instantly. Seeing this, Zhu Yun took the opportunity to throw the super powerful Firebird talisman in his hand at the big man. Clang! The sound of the phoenix rang out, and the big man felt a terrifying power. How could he care about staying here to fight back? He almost used up all his spiritual power and fled far away. Zhu Yun took the opportunity to step forward with the Changshengju footwork, stepped forward and picked up Sun Qiniang, who had been stunned and forgot to continue to self-destruct, and stepped on the sword and left. The Firebird talisman quickly turned into a fire phoenix, but it quickly dispersed without a target. The big man showed fear on his face, but quickly regained his mind. Don't let them get away. Even if he has such means at the 12th level of Qi refining, I'm afraid it won't be much. Wait until I chase him until his spiritual power is exhausted, and see how he can deal with it. The big man summoned his life magic weapon, and saw that the disc suddenly became larger, carrying him up into the sky, and chasing Zhu Yun quickly. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 105. Zhu Yun, why did you save me? In mid-air, Zhu Yun stepped on the flying sword, half hugging Sun Qiniang in one hand, and holding a spiritual stone in the other hand, absorbing the spiritual power from it. The blood on the corners of Sun Qiniang's mouth had been dried and split into pieces as she opened her mouth to ask questions. That's because you wanted to save me first. Zhu Yun glanced back and saw a black spot slowly approaching behind him. Knowing that it was the monk chasing after him, he said something and said to Sun Qiniang, "Can you stand firm on the flying sword?" Well enough. Sun Qiniang followed his gaze, a flash of panic flashed in her eyes. When she heard Zhu Yun's question, she still responded and stepped on it. Although she was seriously injured, she still had some strength left in her body. The natal magic weapon was only damaged and did not completely self-destruct. It was not a big problem to stand firm on it. Zhu Yun, you'd better run away. How can we escape the pursuit of the foundation establishment stage? Sun Qiniang swallowed a few essence-nourishing pills and spoke a little weakly. He didn't dare to chase directly. Zhu Yun said in a deep voice. Why? Sun Qiniang was surprised. At this glance, the big man was only 100 steps away from them, but his speed slowed down and he followed leisurely. Because not everyone is as unafraid of death as you are. Zhu Yun let go of Sun Qiniang's hand, and this time he pulled out a golden talisman. Although the super powerful Firebird talisman is amazingly powerful, it is not strong enough and can only be used for sneak attacks, and its activation requires a lot of spiritual power. Even though he is already at the 12th level of Qi refining and is only one step away from the foundation building stage, the gap in the realm is still huge. On the contrary, at this time, the golden light talisman can give him a chance to breathe when he encounters a crisis. Zhu Yun, but your spiritual stone will always be used up. Sun Qinyang didn't know what kind of talisman Zuyun was holding in that hand, but the spiritual power of the spiritual stone in the other hand was rapidly diminishing. In the blink of an eye, he had already changed into a spiritual stone. It's okay, I just need to hold on until the Lingjian sect. Zuyun had already thought of a good countermeasure when he brought Sun Qinyang with him. Only by going to Lingjian sect can he escape the pursuit of this foundation building man. Spirit Sword Sect? Why are you still going to Ling Sword Sect? Sun Qinyang exclaimed, almost losing her balance and falling from her sword. I have my own way. You can quickly resolve the potion, recover more of your injuries, and be more able to protect yourself. After Zuyun finished speaking, he ignored Sun Qinyang and saw him adjusting his direction from time to time, and looking behind him from time to pay attention to the big man's movements. The big man followed closely, maintaining the same speed as Zuyun. But in comparison, his spiritual energy consumption was extremely small. If he hadn't been afraid that he might be attacked by the Firebird talisman again when he got close, he wouldn't have been able to follow him like this. Ye is who? The top of Yaluo mountain. Clouds and mist lingered among the dilapidated ruins. Meng Wei sat in the dilapidated hall where the wind was leaking from all sides, and he opened his eyes suddenly. His piercing eyes seemed to see through everything. Girl, you have finally reached the peak of the late stage of foundation building. Now, it's time for me to leave. Sun Suanhua stretched and stood up. Grandpa, it's been 7 years and there's no way I can repay you. Meng Wei got down from the front seat and bowed to Sun Suanhua to thank him. 1 year after leaving Lingjian sect, 3 years in Yeazhu, and 3 years in Yaluo sect to recuperate. Without Sun Suanhua taking care of him, Meng Wei might not have reached the foundation building stage so quickly. So she also claimed that everything had changed. Sun Suanhua shook his head and said with a wry smile, you were so seriously injured at that time, how could I abandon you? Fortunately, I got around all the way and persisted. Now that your injury has recovered, it's time for me to do my own things. Reviving the 7-star sect, Meng Wei tilted his head and said. How is that possible? Sun Suanhua sighed, hypocrites like Wang Jianshan didn't eradicate them at that time. It's a virtue accumulated by our Kixing sect for thousands of years. I plan to pay homage to the master and then go to Chuzhu. Chuzhu? Meng Wei wondered, what's the point of Chuzhu? Chickens don't lay eggs, birds don't poop, and it's so hot. In addition to monsters, there are also some weird monks. Grandpa, why don't you stay in my secluded place, Luo Zone? How about I build you a 7-star hall? Sun Suanhua laughed dumbly and said, Yaluo sect does not accept male disciples. Besides, I went to Chuzhu because of the geothermal heat there. Maybe I can have a chance to find spiritual fire. Spiritual fire is not that easy to find, Grandpa. It's not that Wei looks down on you, it's just that your strength is too weak. Sun Suanhua laughed loudly and said, Girl, Grandpa, I am not as weak as you think. I just can't see enough to face the monks head on. There are many demons in Chuzhu, and since there are fewer people, naturally the dangers I encounter will also be less. And I didn't waste these 3 years. 3 years ago, they arrived here. Meng Wei used the spirit stone given by Zuyun to activate the mountain protection formation and began to practice here. Since there are only 2 people to protect, the spirit stones are very little consumed and the place is extremely safe. Sun Suanhua had nothing to do except look after him a little. After obtaining Meng Wei's consent, a lot of good things were found in the ruins of other dilapidated buildings. The most common ones were intermediate talisman papers, which allowed him to draw quite a few intermediate talismans. At the same time, there were some broken and damaged magic tools. He used the refining room here to knock and smelt them, and purified some useful materials. Not only did he create a new life magic tool for himself, but he also refined a lot of handy things. Sun Suanhua just didn't like to practice, not that he didn't want to become stronger. Grandpa, since you have made up your mind to leave, we will no longer keep you. You always say that you only have 100 years left to live. We can only borrow flowers to offer to Buddha. While speaking, Meng Wei took out a red pill from his storage bag, and a sweet bloody aura instantly filled the hall. Is this longevity pill? Sun Suanhua's smile froze, with an incredible look on his face. 7 years. Meng Wei is almost inseparable from him, which means she has always had a longevity pill. Yes, that's right. Meng Wei stood up and slapped the longevity pill into his hand. Girl, this is too expensive, I can't take it. Sun Suanhua shook his head and took a few steps back. Or rather, he knew that Meng Wei needed the longevity pill more than he did. Grandpa, Meng Wei said seriously, you can also make pills, and you know better than me what effect the same pill will have if you take too much. I have already taken 2 longevity pills, and it would be a waste to take more. So, I'll give it to you. Besides, I still have some. This. Sun Suanhua actually wanted it very much, but he just didn't dare to ask for it. Don't say this or that, Grandpa, I, Meng Wei, mean what I say. If you don't take it in front of me, then you will stay in Yaloo sect forever. Wei wants to see if your array skills can break my mountain protection array. Meng Wei seemed a little angry and raised his voice. Sun Suanhua knew Meng Wei's temper, so he had to take it and swallow it, and then he sat down and began to dissolve the drug power without being polite. After a full hour, Sun Suanhua finally absorbed all the drug power, and his lifespan had increased by 100 years. Meng Wei smiled happily and said, Grandpa, you can go now. Sun Suanhua was not happy at all. He shook his head and said to Meng Wei, Girl, Wanjian Mountain is probably still looking for you. You must be careful and don't act rashly. Meng Wei's eyes flashed with disdain, and he said, unless the swordsman from Wanjian Mountain is in the Jindan stage, otherwise the foundation building stage. The rest of the words are self-evident. Sun Suanhua nodded, said a word of see you later, and then sacrificed the new life magic weapon and flew west directly from the top of Yaloo Mountain. Meng Wei turned around, and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. Swordsman, I don't have time to settle accounts with you. If you dare to come, I will let you destroy your swords and kill people. For now, let's find that braid first. It's been so many years, could it be that he got lost? Meng Wei returned to the hall and sat back on his seat. She flicked her sleeves, and countless black shadows rushed out. After landing, they quickly returned and stuck to Meng Wei's body. In the blink of an eye, Meng Wei was covered by the black shadow all over his body. The black shadow kept squirming and stretching, and when it reached a certain height, it slowly disappeared into Meng Wei's body. When it completely disappeared, a girl in her 20s suddenly appeared on the seat. She opened her red lips slightly and muttered to herself, Master, you told your disciples before that you must not change back to your original appearance until a critical moment. But Wei is the only one left in Yaloo section. Is it a critical moment? After that, she stood up and walked a few steps, and found that her clothes were too tight and inconvenient to move. Then she remembered that she had changed from a 10-year-old girl back, and the area between her chest and hips had been stretched a lot, revealing a few white spots. Seeing her body, Meng Wei's pretty face turned red. Then she turned and walked towards the depths of the broken hall. When he came out again, he had changed into a set of fitted clothes, and then he smiled and walked out of the formation. He threw a long sword casually and flew down the mountain. At this time, Zuyun and Sun Qiniang had already flown to the town at the foot of Lingjian Mountain. Without saying a word, he rushed to the ground. How could the big man not know about Lingjian sect? He thought that if these two people told Lingjian sect, many foundation building cultivators in the sect would come out to help, which would be very bad. Not to mention that if the news was leaked, he would not be able to deceive so many cultivators after the 6th level of qi refining in the future. He accelerated his breath, and just after Zuyun landed and rushed towards the Lingjian Sect's trail, he also fell down. And Zuyun, as if he had expected it, suddenly threw a golden talisman at the big man. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 106. When the big man saw the talisman flying over, he thought that Zuyun had thrown out the firebird talisman again, so he dodged to the side. Who knew that the talisman suddenly exploded, emitting a dazzling golden light, as if he suddenly saw the scorching sun in the darkness, and his eyes could not see anything in an instant. The big man was shocked at first, but then he regained his consciousness and released his spiritual consciousness. Seeing that Zuyun was just running towards the mountain and did not continue to release the firebird talisman, he breathed a sigh of relief. After 3 breaths, his eyesight recovered, and Zuyun just happened to climb to the mountain gate. He quickly caught up, intending to kill the 2 men before the foundation building period of the Lingjian sect came out, and then escape. But he didn't know that after Zuyun went up the mountain, he actually threw out 2 identity nameplates and rushed straight into the sect. The gatekeeper was no longer Mo Peng. But he recognized the identity nameplate, which belonged to the Lingjian section. He thought that it must be an elder's close disciple who encountered an emergency. Just as he was about to use his spiritual power to check the name on the nameplate, he heard Zuyun's voice. Hurry up and be alert, there is a strong enemy attacking. Before the disciple could react, the big man had already rushed to him and slapped the disciple away with one palm. If he was not in a hurry to catch Zuyun, he would have shown no mercy once he attacked. The disciple fell to the ground and fainted directly, unconscious. After the chaos 6 years ago, the Lingjian sect had already declined. There were not many disciples in the sect, and at this time, except for the disciple guarding the mountain gate, there was no one else. Zuyun was anxious, and he did not expect the big man to be so decisive. Fortunately, when he came to the Lingjian sect, he did not put all his hopes on the Lingjian sect, but in his own valley. I haven't solved the fog array set by Sun Suanhua, so it's not that easy to ask someone to come again. He is from Yazhu. How can Lingjian sect find another person who can make pills and draw talismans, and also make instruments and set up arrays? Zuyun's strength is no longer what it used to be. He dragged Sun Qiniang all the way and ran wildly. The speed of Chang Shengju was not much slower than flying with a sword. Although the big man was at a high level, he couldn't catch up for a while when running. If he wasn't afraid that flying with an instrument would alarm the foundation building figures in Lingjian sect, he would have killed him long ago. Zuyun didn't relax his mind because of this. He ran wildly at full speed, but Sun Qiniang's eyes were moving. Of course, she knew that Zuyun was going to take her to the valley. But there was only one exit in this valley. After entering, he didn't dare to run into a dead end. But he thought again, Zuyun flew hundreds of miles to come to Lingjian sect, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Just when she thought of this, she suddenly found herself wrapped in a cloud of fog. In the fog, Zuyun dodged and moved, but did not walk in a straight line. After a moment, he rushed out of the fog. In an instant, she recognized that this was a formation, and asked, Zuyun, do you want to use this formation to trap the foundation building period? She looked nervous. Although she did not understand the formation, she could feel that this fog formation could not withstand the full force of the big man. As long as the big man came here, they would still die. Zuyun took a deep breath, pointed in the direction of the refining room and said, you go to the door of that room and wait for me first. Sun Qinyang only hesitated for a moment and rushed over. Along the way, she was almost recovering from her injuries. Her injuries recovered a lot, but she had no strength to fight again. She could only rely on Zhu Yun's command. Just as she arrived at the door, a black disk suddenly rose into the sky from the fog array. The powerful might was brought up, and a majestic spiritual power flowed around the disk. The big man just shouted the word break, and the disk smashed down. The valley shook, and the fog exploded. It disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Sun Suanhua was right. Although this fog array was mysterious, it was not difficult for the foundation building period to break it. The big man panted slightly, his eyes were anxious, but he said with disdain, "Boy, this broken array also wants to trap me? Die." Zhu Yun seemed to be running away in a panic, but he was confident. He rushed to the refining room in an instant, and when he reached the door, he pulled Sun Qinyang. "Zhu Yun, why are you running into the house?" Sun Qinyang was terrified. The big man even broke the array, so why couldn't he break this small house? "Shut up." Zhu Yun cursed, and closed the door when he entered the door, then jumped directly from the alchemy furnace and landed on the furnace. There was a ventilation window on the stove side. Zhu Yun opened it with a palm and jumped out of the house with Sun Qinyang. "Zhu Yun, what are you doing? And why is there a furnace in this refining room?" Sun Qinyang was completely confused. Zhu Yun had no time to explain to Sun Qinyang, but angrily said, "If you don't speak, no one will think you are dumb. Don't make noise, hold your breath." As soon as the voice fell, they heard the sound of gravity opening the door. The big man wanted to smash the house and Zhu Yun to death with the round plate. But just smashing the mist array, he had already spent most of his spiritual power. It's easy to smash someone to death, but if the people of the Spirit Sword sect attack, he will be powerless to escape. Anyway, these two people will die. Where can you hide in this small house? Just push the door and see that there is no one in the house." He frowned slightly and instantly set his eyes on the copper furnace. And it just so happened that this copper stove was so huge that it blocked the window on the stove side completely. "Little kid, even if this copper furnace is made of the finest black copper, can't I smash it flat?" The big man thought Zhu Yun and Sun Qinyang were hiding inside and holding on until the people from the Spirit Sword sect came over. He was holding a round plate and was going to smash the furnace and the people directly. Little did he know. Now after he took a step, a formation pattern suddenly flashed under his feet. It flashed quickly and disappeared even faster. The big man only noticed a spiritual power fluctuation coming from the copper furnace, and thought that Zhu Yun was accumulating strength to attack. With a grim smile, he smashed the round plate directly. The copper furnace was just a primary furnace, and it was made of ordinary fine copper. How could it withstand the attack of this mid-grade magic weapon? With a clang, a big hole was smashed in the copper furnace. At the same time, the soul-inducing formation left by Zhu Yun here 6 years ago has also been activated. The spiritual power fluctuation that the big man just felt was the soul-inducing formation extracting the spiritual power from the spirit stone and transferring it all to the Firebird talisman. These Firebird talismans were basically drawn by Zhu Yun during his early practice. They were not spiritual enough, but they were powerful. With a bang, all the Firebird talismans instantly turned into fire phoenixes and squeezed into the furnace. A Firebird talisman that was comparable to a blow in the Jindan period was squeezed together in an instant. Although this furnace was poor, it was more than enough to withstand a breath of time. Most of the fire phoenixes were suddenly squeezed out of the hole and rushed towards the big man frantically. Clang! 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 The sound of the phoenix was endless. Before the big man showed a horrified expression, he was swallowed by the first fire phoenix. Before the fire was gone, the second one rushed again. The third one. The fourth one. There was no fifth one, because the copper furnace exploded at this moment. The refining room instantly became a ruin, and at the same time, a huge deep pit appeared under the house. At this time, Zuyun had already taken Sun Qinyang to run out of the valley. Zuyun, you actually killed him. Sun Qinyang was completely frightened. Shut up, run. The noise in the mist array just now was so loud that it will definitely attract the elders of the sect. Zuyun shouted, and Sun Qinyang immediately came back to her senses and was dragged by Zuyun to run quickly. But the look of fear in her eyes could not be dissipated for a long time. Zuyun was not worried about the noise when the big man was blown to death, because the soundproof array he set up at that time was still there. Even if it was impossible to completely isolate such noise, the momentum could be reduced a lot. What he was afraid of was that the mist array was destroyed. If the elders of the sect were a little bit concerned, noticed the noise here, and rushed over to take a look, he, Zuyun, was afraid that he would not have a good result. The two ran back to the mountain gate along the way they came, and fortunately they didn't meet anyone along the way. And the disciple guarding the mountain gate was still lying on the ground unconscious. Zuyun glanced at the table and found that his and Sun Qinyang's identity badges were still on the table. He took them and threw them into the storage bag, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the Lingjian sect has declined, and there are not many people. Otherwise, how could they have escaped as before? After running down the mountain with Sun Qinyang, Zuyun threw out his long sword and took Sun Qinyang away on the sword. Now, you can talk. Zuyun's pounding heart slowly calmed down. What to say? Sun Qinyang asked unhappily. You told me to shut up, so I shut up. You told me to say it, so I say it. Along the way, I don't know how many times Zuyun yelled at me to shut up. Zuyun was speechless and said, do you have a good place to go? We have to hide. The Lingjian sect will find out sooner or later. And if we go down the mountain to ask, I'm afraid they will know that it is inseparable from us. In the town at the foot of the mountain, many casual cultivators saw them. Sun Qinyang curled her lips and said, 200 miles to the northeast is the territory of Wangxian section. Why don't we hide there? Wangxian sect, Zuyun frowned and said, listening to the name, it seems a bit difficult to mess with. Sun Qinyang nodded and said, it is indeed difficult to mess with. If you make trouble, they will use the power of the entire sect to deal with you. Zuyun said angrily, then why are you talking about going there? To die. Sun Qinyang couldn't help it. She laughed so hard that her whole body trembled, which made Zuyun confused. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 107. Why are you laughing? Zuyun looked puzzled. Because there are only two people in Wangxian sect. Sun Qinyang couldn't hold it back any longer and burst into laughter. Zuyun's face turned dark and he said, is it so funny? You don't think it's funny, but I think it's funny. But one thing to say, Wangxian sect's side is pretty good. Compared to Lingjian sect, the spiritual energy there is more abundant, which is suitable for us to hide for a while. Zuyun thought for a moment and found that it had nothing to do with spiritual energy. The key was the northeast direction, which would be relatively closer to Yezhu. Is there a market over there? Zuyun asked. He has consumed a lot in his cultivation over the years, but he also has a lot of inventory. If there is a market, he can exchange for some spiritual stones. When you arrive in Yezhu, it will always be much more convenient if you have some spirit stones with you. Yes, but the city is small in scale. There are many casual cultivators in Wangxian sect, most of whom practice magic. At the qi refining stage, sword cultivators are relatively strong, so their treasure hunting skills are not as good as sword repair. Zuyun pondered for a moment and said, if there is a market, then go to Wangxian sect. After making the decision, Zuyun flew in that direction. A few hours later, when they felt safe, they fell down. Sun Qinyang's injury has fully recovered, which is entirely due to her single-line ice spirit root. However, the damage to her natal magic weapon had a considerable impact on her strength. Although it can be reused, it can break at any time. By then, she would still be seriously injured. "Do you know magic?" Zuyun asked. While holding the sword, Sun Qinyang briefly introduced him to Wang Xian's section. If he left with the sword, it would arouse the hostility of the casual cultivators. Especially since they are at the 12th level of Qi refining, they are considered strong. Unless you come to the foundation building period, you will probably be invincible during the foundation building period. Although I don't know spells, I can use ice spirit roots to simulate spells. It's just that it consumes too much. After all, Sun Qinyang had practiced for a lifetime. She retained her memory and naturally remembered the spells she had learned before. Although the spiritual roots are different and cannot be fully used, she feels that it is not a big problem to fool the servants. "And you?" Sun Qinyang asked back. Zuyun said nothing, but stretched out his palm, and a flame rose from his hand. "Your flame is so powerful." Not far away, Sun Qinyang felt the great power contained in the jumping flames. "It's just an ordinary primary spell." Zuyun didn't explain too much. If he used a single element of fire spiritual power, the fire lifting curse would only be stronger. Anyway, as long as you are not a sword cultivator, the people here are pretty good. Maybe you were bullied by the spirit sword sect in the past? I don't know the specific situation. The two walk side by side, talking and walking aimlessly along the path. Zuyun put away the sword early and stuffed Sun Qinyang with some super powerful fireball talismans and golden light talismans. He also talked about the functions and powers of the two talismans. Sun Qinyang smiled bitterly and said, "This golden light talisman is the talisman you use to explode the foundation building period, right? I have seen it before and know when to use it appropriately. But this fireball talisman. The fireball talisman is very powerful. It is only for self-defense. Don't use it randomly." Zuyun explained it specially. Sun Qinyang shook her head and suddenly said, "I'm afraid you have forgotten that I was killed by your fireball talisman." Zuyun was stunned and smiled sheepishly. Sun Qinyang laughed out loud, but it was a blessing in disguise. "I came back to life and actually had a single-line mutated spiritual root. Zuyun, I have to thank you, not only for this relationship, but also for your words to stop me from being a bully. As long as you figure it out." Zuyun's attitude towards Sun Qinyang was completely different at this time. When facing the foundation building period, in order to delay time and let myself run away, regardless of life or death, the grudge in my heart disappeared without a trace at that moment. He had never quite agreed with what Sun Suanhua said to him. In the world of immortality, everyone is in danger, and no one can be trusted. But Zuyun believes that as long as he is strong enough and no one dares to kill him, then why should he kill others? Stick to your heart and don't offend others. It is backed by strong strength. Who else would kill himself? But as long as someone has thoughts of killing, Zuyun will never hold back. Cutting off the weeds and rooting them out, we will not stop until we die." After thinking for a while, Zuyun asked, "What are your plans now? I remember you have the foundation establishment pill." This was a thought that suddenly popped up in his mind. If Sun Qinyang's realm was so different from his own, would she kill him? "I have the foundation building pill, but I think it's better for you to build the foundation first." Sun Qinyang took one out of her storage bag and handed it directly to Zuyun. Zuyun was stunned and a little unsure. "You give me such an important elixir?" Sun Qinyang tilted her head and said, "Zuyun, don't tell me, are you afraid it's poison?" Zuyun shook his head, "Of course not. Whether this is the foundation establishment pill or not, I can feel it through the bottle. He does have this ability." As long as the porcelain bottle is in his hand, his spiritual sense can explore it. Even though I have never refined the Foundation establishment pill, I can still recognize it. Then why not? Sun Qiniang asked first, and then said, I was thinking that your brain is better than mine. If you build the foundation first, it will be easier for me to escape if I encounter danger. Hearing this reason, Zuyun laughed dumbly and said, you should keep it for now. We will talk about the Foundation establishment pill later. By the way, your natal magic weapon is damaged and needs to be repaired, right? The natal magic weapon can be replaced, but a certain price needs to be paid. If you break the mental connection with your natal magic weapon, you will be severely damaged. In terms of the degree of injury, it was only slightly lighter than the destruction of his natal magic weapon. Unless they can encounter a better and more suitable natal magic weapon, ordinary monks will never dare to take such risks. Like Sun Xuanhua, in order to allow himself to escape safely, he made a natal magic weapon with limited materials. But after arriving at Yaluo sect, I was sure that the situation was very safe, so I changed it. It needs to be repaired, but in Wangxian sect, there is no place to repair this natal magic weapon. Zuyun was puzzled, isn't there a place to refine weapons in the realm of Wangxian sect? As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he suddenly remembered that Wangxian sect didn't like sword cultivators very much. If you take out this sword, who will repair it for you? He touched his head nonchalantly and looked at Sun Qiniang, only to see that Sun Qiniang had a joking look on her face. Zuyun's face turned red and he said slightly angrily, what I mean is, let me see if I can help you fix it. You help me repair it? Do you know how to refine weapons? She looked Zuyun up and down, and suddenly said, yes, you are Sun Xuanhua's apprentice. Wait, where is Sun Xuanhua? Zuyun was too lazy to explain, and said calmly, of course I know how to refine weapons. Let's go find a weapon room and let you see what I am capable of. I can refine low-grade and high-level magical weapons as long as I have the materials. This repair, of course, it's no problem. When he was still in the valley, Zuyun had practiced weapon refining a lot. He can refine a low-grade standard magic sword in an hour. He even secretly used the same materials to refine a low-grade mid-level one. He has mastered low-level and high-level techniques, but saying that he has mastered them is a bit bragging. He just doesn't want to fall short in front of Sun Qiniang. But if it is repaired, the problem is not that big. Quenching again and mastering the fire is almost enough. When Sun Qiniang saw this, she was immediately excited and said, if the natal magic weapon has been repaired, Zuyun, you can practice with peace of mind, and I will get the Foundation establishment pill for you. Zuyun smiled and said nothing. The Zhuhao mountain range is located in the center of Yaezhu, directly dividing Yaezhu into two. Wanjianshan and Yaluo sect are in North Yaezhu. Haori sect and Amolun sect are in South Yaezhu. The relationship between these two sects is just like that between Wanjian mountain and Yaluo sect, except that the situation of Maluo sect is 1,000 times better than that of Yaluo sect. At least, they preserved their power early and hid some talented disciples in the Zhuhao mountains. The Zhuhao mountains are not as broad and long as the Hongduan mountains, but they are more advantageous in that they have many dangerous places, which has allowed them to leave a lasting impression. Where there are many dangerous places, there will naturally be more resources. At this time, more than 10 foundation building monks from the Magic Wheel sect were lurking in a spiritual stone mine 10 miles away. This mine belongs to the Haori sect. Little Braid, you worked very hard today. You dug 1,000 spiritual stones, not bad. In the dark mine, Ergu, his face covered with plaster, knelt on the ground and took a bigo pill with a flattering smile. Thank you, steward, for the reward. Steward is truly the kindest person I have ever seen. Ha ha ha, our Haori sect convinces people with virtue, but some people are ignorant. It's good to be alive, but you dare to speak ill of me behind your back here. If you dig another 1,000 yuan tomorrow, I will reward you with another one. Be Gupil. The manager was very helpful and laughed. Really, Ergo said with a surprised look on his face, well, sir, I'm going to dig it now. After eating this Bigo pill, I'm full of strength. The moment he turned around, Ergo's face quickly darkened. Pick up the mining pick and head towards the main mine. He has been digging the spiritual stone mine for almost 8 years. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 108. Ergo is already very familiar with the spacious and accessible main mine. He never thought that he would be caught by the Heizong people on the way to find Yoluo sect, and would be forced to become a slave miner here. Back then, he practiced again and practiced the techniques taught by Mengwei. He made rapid progress and reached the 5th level of qi refining in the blink of an eye. But now after so many years, he is still at the 5th level of qi refining. There is no shortage of spirit stones in the spirit stone mine. But no one dares to practice with these spiritual stones. There will be supervisors patrolling from time to time. And everyone has a book that records the state of each miner when he entered the cave. As long as the realm changes, it means that the miner has hidden spiritual stones to practice. At the very least, he could give up his cultivation and become a mortal miner, doing more difficult and tiring work. At worst, it sucks the soul and refines the soul, just like the living dead. Ergo is simple and honest, but not stupid. I have seen too many monks over the years. Regardless of their level of cultivation, as long as they show some prowess, they will be arrested by the supervisors of the Haori sect. Eventually I never see anyone again. He doesn't practice, but that doesn't mean he just accepts his fate. Walking along the main mine, there are numerous entrances that turn into smaller mines. These were dug out by some miners, including Ergu, who also dug a bottomless mine tunnel. He spent 6 years digging this mine tunnel, and he didn't know where he found it. But every few hundred steps, he would dig a little diagonally upward. He firmly believes that one day, he can dig it into the ground. When the time comes, you can escape alive. Walking all the way to the entrance of his mine, Ergu turned directly in. After walking to the end, he opened up some spirit stone slag, revealing a strange dark red knife. The slag that buried the knife had turned gray-white, indicating that the spiritual energy in the slag, which was not rich in content, had been absorbed by the knife. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. I really don't know that this magical weapon can absorb spiritual power automatically. Ergu picked up the mining pick, dug down the mineral soil bit by bit, and buried the knife again. As if feeling the aura of spiritual power, the knife flashed a strange dark red light, and then gradually dimmed. North Ye is who? Mengwei arrived at a market town, bought some mortal clothes, put them on, and sat in a restaurant. Before she was suppressed, she was the treasure held by the entire Yoluo sect. But it is also the murder weapon of Yoluo sect. Apart from practicing, she also kills people in Wanjian Mountain. So I don't understand the ways of the world. All matters outside of Yoluo sect were told to her by Master Luo Ruyan and a group of elders. It wasn't until Sun Suan who had told her many things about Yezu in the past 6 years that she understood a lot. For example, to inquire about information, Mortal Restaurant is the most suitable place. Here are mortals telling strange stories. There are also low-level monks who brag and spank. Mengwei thought that since Ergu hadn't arrived at Yoluo sect for 6 years, there must have been an accident on the way. And his unique braid must be the most impressive. As long as she has the general direction, she can rush there. After getting closer to the natal magic weapon, she can naturally detect the location. Sitting by the window, she seemed to be looking at the stone road outside and thinking deeply, but in fact, the voices from the entire second floor of the restaurant reached her ears. Did you know that Wang Dalan, who was selling sesame cakes a few days ago, suddenly died suddenly. Hey, I just found out that her wife committed adultery with a handsome boy named Qing, and then gave him poison. No one cares about things like this. Who cares? There are so many immortal masters in the town recently, no one dares to care. Have you heard that the people in Wanjian Mountain have gone crazy recently? It's best not to mess with them. Wanjianshan is a famous and upright sect in Yezhu. From what I can see, it must be the resurgence of the demonic monks. Fellow Taoist, I am a member of the Fu sect. We caught you sleeping with my junior sister. How many spiritual stones are you going to use to resolve this matter? Zhao Fu sect? What a majestic figure. You dare to play immortal dance with me? Tell me, how many spirit stones, I will be a beggar. Meng Wei listened to various sounds and secretly found them interesting. Why have you never thought of dressing up as a mortal and eavesdropping in these restaurants? At this time, two more lowered voices came into her ears. There are only 2 years left in the century-old secret realm. Have you found the helper I want? Found them, they are all above the middle stage of foundation building. Let's meet under Zilang Peak before the secret realm opens. That's great. Wanjian Mountain seems to be looking for someone in the past 2 years. It is estimated that not many people will come to the secret realm. And I heard that in the Juhao Mountains, the Magic Wheel sect is also ready to make a move, and the Haori sect is probably too busy to take care of itself. This kind of big sect can't care about the secret realm, but this is the opportunity I've been waiting for. That's right, this secret realm happens once in 100 years, and now it's the 3rd time. If we can gain something, I think some of us will be able to achieve a few pill-forming stages, and we may be able to truly gain a foothold in Yezhu. The two people talking were both in the middle stage of foundation building. They never imagined that Meng Wei, who didn't understand anything, would sit in the restaurant and eavesdrop on their conversation. Generally speaking, it is impossible for people in the foundation building stage to talk in a restaurant, but these two people did the opposite, thinking that with their own realm, they would lower their voices so that no one would hear them. Furthermore, almost everyone in Yezhu knows the news about this secret realm. They were just discussing how to unite. As for Meng Wei, although his realm has not yet returned to the pill-forming stage, it is absolutely impossible even in a short period of time. But it is easy to listen to the conversation between these two people. She was not interested in the secret realm. Instead, I heard the words Zilang Feng. Sun Suan Hua said that Master and the Master of Wanjian Mountain finally fought to the death on the top of Zilang Peak. As a result, the golden elixirs came out one after another, and eventually both of them disappeared. Could it be that the secret realm has something to do with Master and the others? Furthermore, from what they said, it seemed that the secret realm was opened for the 3rd time 2 years later. And the Master has disappeared for more than 300 years. Meng Wei secretly kept an eye on it. This secret place must be visited when the time comes. So before that, Ergo still had to be found, not only because of Zhu Yun's relationship, but also to get back his natal magic weapon. The rest of the conversation between the two people contained no useful information. They basically cared about what would happen after they became stronger. Meng Wei sneered, of course she was looking at it from the perspective of the Danja stage. She planned to sit there for a while and then go to the Juhao Mountains to look for people from the Magic Wheel sect. Back then, they both belonged to the Devil's Path, so they had some connections. Maybe they could give her some face and help her find out if Ergo was lost in the Juhao Mountains. Yunzo. At the foot of the Wangxian sect, Zhu Yun frowned and asked Sun Qiniang beside him, are you sure there are only 2 people in the Wangxian sect? Sun Qiniang said helplessly, when I followed my 2 elder brothers to make a living here, I knew very well that there were only 2 people in Wangxian sect. Zhu Yun curled his lips, pointed at the mountain gate and said, don't tell me that the 3 people sitting there were blinded by me. Before that, the 2 of them visited many places, but they were able to find a place with weapon refining. But it was too crude, and Zuyun was afraid that the sword given to Sun Qiniang would be damaged. Finally, the two of them discussed and came to Wangxian sect to have a look. After all, they are a sect, and the weapon refining room must be more complete, and even if they find out it is a sword, they won't be so stingy, right? At worst, Zuyun takes some elixirs as reward, and I hope that the immortal sect will not be in trouble. But after finally arriving here, not only did I see 3 people sitting at the mountain gate, but also monks dressed in various costumes, walking along the mountain path into the lookout immortal sect. At this time, Zuyun became suspicious of Sun Qiniang. How about we go up and have a look? Maybe the Wangxian sect has become more prosperous in the past 2 years. Sun Qiniang only thinks about her ice blue sword now. Just take a look. It took a lot of effort to get here. I just wanted to borrow the weapon refining room. Zuyun thought for a moment, then walked to the mountain gate with Sun Qiniang. Do fellow Taoists also come to the Wangxian sect ruins to practice? A monk stretched out his hand towards Zuyun, made an empty fist, and rubbed his thumb and index finger back and forth. Zuyun didn't understand, and was even more curious as to why the word relics was mentioned, but Sun Qiniang was smart and took out a spiritual stone and handed it over. I'm here for the first time, so I'd like to ask you two to tell me how the sect has become a ruins because of its rich spiritual energy. The monk excitedly took the spirit stone, tossed it in his hand, laughed, and said, "The two of you are really behind the times. The master and deputy master of Wangxian sect went to Yezhou a few years ago. There is no one here, so the monks in this area naturally come here to practice. Maybe if you look around, you can find some good things they left behind." I see. Sun Qiniang suddenly understood and smiled again. Those 3 are sitting here. For the monks within 100 miles of radius, this ruins is a good place for cultivation and treasure hunting. But too many people means too many inconveniences. The 3 of us will sit here to collect protection fees. Since the 2 Taoist friends have Lingxi, then the 3 of us will naturally protect you. As he spoke, the monk's momentum suddenly rose. I'm at the 12th level of qi refining. You two, please don't cause trouble in there. Zuyun and Mengwei both took the qi condensation pill, and their auras were displayed in the 6th level of qi refining. No wonder this monk was a little arrogant. The 2 looked at each other and bowed their hands to the 3 monks. Only then did he enter the Wangxian sect. Someone has set the rules here, which is a good thing for them. They searched all the way and finally found the weapon refining room. It's just that the place is a little dilapidated, and there is only one stove left in the huge refining room. Come to think of it, everything that could be moved was moved. Fortunately, Zuyun only lacked a stove, and there was no shortage of other tools, including spiritual wood and spiritual charcoal for the fire. Qiniang, you stay outside and I'll help you repair your natal magic weapon. Zuyun was busy for a while Qiniang was relaxing outside. Not long after, a clanking sound came out, and Sun Qiniang's mood gradually became excited. As long as her natal magic weapon is repaired, her injuries can truly be restored, and her strength can return to the peak of the 12th level of qi refining. But after a cup of tea, a cursing voice came from the bamboo forest outside the weapon refining room. Who the hell is forging iron here and not allowing people to practice? As soon as he finished speaking, 2 monks, a man and a woman, rushed out in disheveled clothes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 109. The male cultivator was furious, while the female cultivator was unsatisfied. In her previous life, Sun Qiniang lived for several decades, so she naturally saw some clues. It was obvious that this man and woman were practicing together. There are so many ways to practice together in the world, but they all lead to the same goal. And these two people must have thought that there was no one here, and the spiritual energy was relatively rich. It must be Zuyun's hammer, which was fast and even, that naturally affected the rhythm of the male cultivator's practice. 6th level of Qi refining. When the male cultivator saw Sun Qiniang standing at the door, his eyes lit up first, and then he felt a sharp pain in his waist. Humph, seeing a beautiful girl, your eyes are about to fall out. It turned out that the female cultivator's hand pinched the male cultivator's waist, and she also used spiritual power. No, 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 I mean this little girl of the 6th level of Qi refining, we can drive her away. The casual cultivators walking outside basically have the ability to judge their own realm. Of course, only those with a high realm can see through those with a low realm. But they didn't know that Sun Qiniang had taken Zuyun's breath-retaining pill, and her strength was far superior to theirs. Little girl, quickly ask the people inside to stop, and then get out of Wangxian sect. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. The female cultivator said to Sun Qiniang with a gloomy face. Sun Qiniang was full of disdain. She was polite to Zuyun, but she would not be polite to others. And she had been a robber for another lifetime. Although most people were killed by her two brothers, she was not someone to be messed with. However, thinking that Zuyun was repairing the magic weapon, Sun Qiniang didn't want to disturb her, so she said lightly, "How can you be rude? We also paid money to enter this Wangxian sect. Aren't you afraid of the 3 Qi refining 12 heavens outside?" Little girl, the female cultivator's face disappeared gloomy, as if looking at a fool, "There is no one here. If I kill you, who will know? You said that, it reminded me." Sun Qiniang laughed and stretched out her palm to slap it out. Although she had no sword in her hand, she was at the 12th level of Qi refining. With just the strength of her spiritual power, she could completely crush them. Not to mention, she was a single-line ice spiritual root. A layer of ice energy rushed out from her hand and rushed towards the female cultivator. So strong. The female cultivator suddenly changed color and turned to leave, but the ice energy had already rushed over her back, and in the blink of an eye, she was frozen into an ice sculpture. The male cultivator was horrified. How could he still think that Sun Qiniang was a little girl at the 6th level of Qi refining? He wanted to run away, but seeing that his female companion couldn't run away, he gave up the idea and immediately knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. "Fairy, spare me. Fairy, spare me." Sun Qiniang said with a cold face, "If I wasn't in a good mood, you too would have died today. However, you actually did that dirty thing near me, so I'll calm your lust first." After that, she slapped the male cultivator again and turned him into an ice sculpture. She clapped her hands and stood back to the door. Soon, Zuyun opened the door and walked out, holding her ice blue sword. "All right." Sun Qiniang was overjoyed and stepped forward to hold the ice blue sword in her hand. A familiar feeling came over her, and through her mind, she could even sense that the power of the sword seemed to be a little stronger. What's going on? Zuyun was a little confused when he saw the two ice sculptures. When repairing the ice blue sword, he was fully focused, and the sound was so loud when he knocked, he didn't hear the movement outside at all. These two people are practicing together in the bamboo forest, and they are annoyed by your noise, so they come to cause trouble. Sun Qiniang couldn't put down the ice blue from childhood to adulthood, and said absent-mindedly. Zuyun said speechlessly, "Aren't you afraid of freezing them?" "What are you afraid of? Let them calm down. I am showing mercy. In the past, I would have killed them long ago." Zuyun shook her head and smiled, "Look at the postures of these two people. One is ready to escape and the other is begging for mercy. They thought I was at the 6th level of Qi refining." Sun Qiniang put the ice blue sword into the storage bag and said disdainfully, if I really let them run away and attract the 3 chi refining 12th levels, there will be a fight. I don't have a sword in my hand, and my strength has not returned to its peak. I am afraid I can't fight 3 alone. So it is natural to freeze them. Okay, Zuyun interrupted Sun Qinyang's boasting words and said, your sword has been repaired, and we should leave. Where are you going? Aren't you practicing here? Sun Qinyang blinked. She just waited for her injuries to recover completely, and then swallowed the foundation building pill. After the breakthrough, she helped Zuyun find another foundation building pill. Wangxian sect is the place with the most abundant spiritual energy within 100 miles, which is perfect. When she breaks through, Zuyun will protect her. Even if the 3 chi refining level 12 come, it is not a big deal for Zuyun. Too many people means more eyes, and too many people means more right and wrong. It is not a suitable place for breakthrough. Zuyun knew what Sun Qinyang was thinking and said, let's go. In my opinion, it should be more appropriate to find a deserted island on the sea. Not appropriate, Sun Qinyang shook her head and said, there are monsters gathering in the southern market, and there may be monsters a little further away. Zuyun didn't care and said, there are more monsters, which means there are fewer people. With your talent, it will be easy to break through, and I will protect you, isn't it just right? Sun Qinyang thought about it and felt that Zuyun's words made sense. Although those monsters were strong, they could be killed by Qi refining level 6. Not to mention, Zuyun Yuan is at the 12th level of Qi refining. Then I'll listen to you. After the two decided, they walked towards the outside of the sect. Walking to the mountain gate, the monk who was responsible for collecting the entrance fee said with surprise, you have only been here for a short time, why are you leaving again? Zuyun smiled and said, it's a bit urgent. I'll come back after it's done. The monk nodded and said, next time you come, you will still have to pay the entrance fee. Zuyun smiled and walked through the mountain gate with Sun Qinyang. When they reached the foot of the mountain, they each took out their magic swords and galloped towards the east. Sword cultivator. Such speed, the 12th level of Qi refining. The other two people also suddenly opened their eyes. The three of them all thought that Zuyun and Sun Qinyang were from the 12th level of Qi refining. After a while, Zuyun and the two disappeared from the sky. The three of them looked at each other. It shouldn't be from the Lingjian sect, otherwise it wouldn't be so easy to talk to. Fortunately, I didn't offend them. We are all from the 12th level, so the three of us cannot defeat their sword cultivators. The three of them expressed their opinions and let out a long sigh of relief. At this time, two wet figures, leaving a footprint with every step they took, with water droplets on their bodies, rushed towards this place. It was the two cultivators after the ice sculpture thawed. Three seniors, two of them just bullied us over there in the bamboo forest and interrupted our practice. Exactly, they took advantage of the higher cultivation level and broke the rules here. The two of them chattered endlessly. One of the monks opened his eyes again and said coldly, you must have not restrained yourself during dual cultivation. You made too much noise and disturbed the two fellow Taoists. Another one also opened his eyes and said, the two fellow Taoists are kind and talkative. I'm afraid you don't have eyesight, right? The monk who collected the spirit stone was annoyed and said, you have offended those two fellow Taoists and you still want me to help you find your place? You have done something wrong, so get out. After that, he slapped the two of them directly down the steps and rolled all the way to the bottom of the mountain. Bah, what's so arrogant? 30 years in Hedong, 30 years in Hexi. Stop talking. These three have been staying here, and there is nothing we can do. Didn't those two go to sea? You mean? After listening to the female cultivator's words, the male cultivator's eyes lit up. Yes, let's go. The coast of the East China Sea. The two flew all the way and landed on a sea cliff. Below the cliff, the waves are raging, eroding the rocks on the shore. Each swallowed a Heki pill. After their spiritual power was almost restored, the two stepped on the magic sword and left with the sword. Every time I find an island, I drop down and take a rest. I have plenty of Heki pills. Zuyun said. Sun Qinyang blinked and said, Zuyun, can you make elixirs? The later elixirs of Lingjian sect were all refined by me. So that's it, Sun Qinyang immediately figured it out. No wonder I didn't see Sun Suanhua in the valley at that time. I'm still wondering why you came to the valley. The sudden explosion of the medicine furnace before was your trap. It's just that I didn't use it later. Indeed, that furnace was left to Mu Huhui at that time. Who would have thought that Mu Huhui died at the hands of the elders of Wanjian Mountain, and this furnace was left to the foundation building period? It was really unintentional. The matter of Sun Suanhua was no longer a secret at this time. Zuyun told how he learned how to make alchemy, weapons, and talismans. This is nothing, Sun Qinyang also knows it. Just talking, Zuyun couldn't help but think of Sun Suanhua. I wonder if he is well at this time, whether Menghui has returned to Yaluo sect, and how far Ergu has cultivated. Sun Suanhua, who was far away in Yazhu, suddenly sneezed in front of the grave. He rubbed his nose and murmured, I don't know if the girl misses me, or if that boy Zuyun is scolding me. Standing up, he bowed to the tombstone in front of him. Master, if you don't teach me, I have no choice but to go to Chuzhu and give it a try. There is only one disciple left in the 7-star sect, but luckily I got a longevity pill. After 100 years, the disciple will definitely come back. If it succeeds, revive the 7-star sect. If we lose, I will dig a hole here and sleep with my master. After saying that, he turned and left. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 110. On a deserted island, there are lush vegetation and few people. It is obvious that no one has ever been here. But it's not too far from the coast, only 30 miles away. But when the two of them were flying in the sky, they found a cave below. With the cover of these vegetation, it was easy to be discovered. In addition, Sun Qinyang was relieved that she didn't meet any monks who were going to sea during this flight. After falling, Zuyun said, you can break through here, I will protect you. Zuyun, aren't you afraid that I will kill you again when I reach the foundation building stage? Sun Qinyang blinked and asked. Zuyun smiled and said, if you want to kill me, you have to see if you have the ability. Sun Qinyang thought about it and realized that Zuyunan was really capable of leading her to escape from the hands of the foundation building men in Nanfangfang city. As long as you're not afraid. She laughed like a silver bell and got into the cave. The reason why she wanted to give the foundation establishment pill to Zuyun in the first place was actually because she was afraid that Zuyun would have this idea. But now that she had said this, she stopped being pretentious and made up her mind to find a foundation establishment pill after she established the foundation. She has thought of where to go. Zuyun stayed outside the cave and sat on a big tree. Under the cover of the tree crown, he was really inconspicuous. Little did they know, the two monks were sitting in a small boat, heading here quickly. If I remember correctly, there is a cave here, which is very suitable. If they want to break through to the foundation building stage, they will definitely be here. The female cultivator said sinisterly. Sun Qinyang completely ignored it. She did not kill her at first. The two people in the ice sculpture heard the entire conversation between her and Zuyun. The male cultivator said, in that case, let's try it. You summon the sea monsters, and I will drug them. After saying that, both of them showed sinister smiles. The female cultivator took out a strange jade instrument and started playing. The whistle is melodious, but the rhythm is like the roar of an animal. After taking a stick of incense, the female cultivator turned pale and put it away, saying, If these monster beasts hadn't been approaching the sea recently, I might not have been able to summon them. Why do you care so much? It's none of our business anyway. Those monks who call themselves righteous men will come and kill the sea monster. As he spoke, the male cultivator took out a jade bottle from the storage bag and poured a lot of transparent liquid along the edge of the boat. Are you taking too much of the aphrodisiac? The female cultivator frowned. Put some strong medicine and let them know the consequences of offending us. These monks on the mainland are all so proud. The male cultivator put away the jade bottle with a dissatisfied look on his face. That's true. How can the monks in our sea area be inferior to them? If the monks from 36 Cave Heaven Island united, wouldn't Yunzhou be captured casually? The nun felt a little tired and sat down against the edge of the boat. The male cultivator turned the boat around and said, "You are overthinking. There are 36 powerful men in the 36 caves, and all of them want to be the leader of the alliance. But we have been talking about it for hundreds of years, how can we say it? If the sea monster hadn't suddenly appeared this year, the beasts are too busy to take care of themselves. I'm afraid they will have to fight for several days and nights. Forget it, although Yunzhou is barren, it is not as good as our sea, but at least there are no sea monster attacks." The male cultivator took control of the boat and quickly sailed back along the original path. In their opinion, as long as Zuyun and the two of them are on that island, they will definitely be eaten alive by the sea monster. Zuyun had no idea that these two monks would target them with such a grudge. Feeling the majestic aura of spiritual power coming from the cave, his attention was completely attracted, and he did not notice at all the sound of Jade Xiao coming not far away, and the unusual waves on the sea level in the distance. Of waves. But inside the cave, Sun Qiniang was so focused that the spiritual energy in her dantian was constantly swirling, and she was even less likely to notice the sea. After about half an hour, Sun Qiniang's breakthrough reached a critical juncture, and Zuyun finally heard the sound of the waves getting louder, and something rubbing against the gravel. He turned his head and looked towards the shore, and his expression suddenly changed. I didn't know when, but this beach was crawling with dense sea monsters of different shapes. Strange shapes, fangs, and green faces. But another characteristic of these sea monsters is that their eyes are red, as if they smell the breath of strangers, and they are crawling towards them quickly. The moist skin gradually became dry under the scorching sun, and grains of salt crystals condensed. As their undulating bodies rolled to the ground, they were quickly stepped into the sand by the monsters behind them. Zuyun's cave is 100 steps away from the beach. If he hadn't been sitting in the tree, he might not have noticed such a change. Looking further into the distance, he was even more frightened. The waves of sea monsters are as far as the eye can see. Didn't you say that they only exist in the south? This place is at least 500 miles away from Nanfangfang City. How can there be so many of these monsters? If Sun Qiniang were not here, Zuyun would have turned around and ran away, but it was obvious that these monsters had a keen sense of smell and could smell Zuyun's breath. Otherwise, if he was hiding in the tree canopy, how would these monsters find him? Can't leave. Zuyun's eyes became hardened, thinking that before, when facing the foundation building stage, Sun Qiniang was determined to die and wanted to let him go first. If she is ignored in another crisis at this time, Sun Qiniang will definitely die. Thinking of this, Zuyun quickly took out a few spiritual stones and threw them at the entrance of the cave. I saw the constant changes in his fingers and words in his mouth. After a while, a soundproof formation was formed. Zuyun was afraid that the news of him killing the monster would disturb Sun Qiniang, who was in the critical period of breaking through. After doing all this, Zuyun reached out and patted the storage bag, and instantly there was a stack of talismans in his hand. All are elementary super powerful fireball talismans. Zuyun doesn't know how long he will kill such a large sea monster wave. Only the talisman consumes the least, and he has a lot of reserves. Zuyun threw a talisman, and the fireball, which was comparable to a strike in the foundation building stage, exploded among the beasts, and the roar immediately shook the sky. But there was another talisman, and then another talisman flew into it, and the roars were endless and connected. After a stack of talismans was used up, the deserted island was filled with a burning smell and beast corpses were everywhere, but there was still a steady stream of sea monsters emerging from the sea and crawling towards Zuyun. Even, because of the roar here, it attracted more sea monsters. They kept focusing on Zuyun. It seems that all the sea monsters have their targets here. On the shore of the mainland, the boat docked. The male cultivator supported the female cultivator and walked from the boat. The two of them also heard the noise, and their eyes showed horror. Listening to such power, could it be that one of them has broken through to the foundation building stage? The female nun said, "So what about the foundation building period? There are only two of them, but I used all my spiritual power to blow the whistle, attracting at least 100,000 sea monsters. Coupled with your beastly aphrodisiac, as long as their spiritual power is exhausted, eventually it's also a death sentence. Yes, unless they run away immediately, now." The male cultivator breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile appeared on his face. At this time, Zuyun has used up thousands of fireball charms, and the storage bag has reached its bottom. Originally it could kill several sea monsters, but now it no longer works. It's not that these sea monsters have learned to be smart and know how to avoid or defend, but the farther back the sea monsters are, the more powerful they are. If those sea monsters at first were at the first level of chi refining, then at this time, these sea monsters are at least at the 12th level of chi refining. Monsters, on the other hand, are naturally physically strong. Otherwise, how can they survive in the wild sea and resist the huge pressure of the sea? Zuyun kept holding his hands and looking into the distance from time to time. If it weren't for the fact that calm had returned to the other side of the sea and no more monsters were attacking, he would have to rack his brains to come up with other countermeasures. At least now, his Firebird talisman has not been used up. But despite this, he only has a few Firebird talismans left. At first, most of them were placed in the copper furnace in the valley, but in the end, by mistake, they were used to blow up the big man in the foundation building period. After swallowing a Heki pill, Zuyun couldn't remember how many pills he had swallowed. He used a pure heart talisman on himself, and the ruthless aura in his eyes caused by too many killings faded a lot. At this time, you need to calm down even more. Taking a deep breath, he took out a Firebird talisman. Just as he was about to use it, there was a sudden strong wind behind him, followed by several salty, wet sea-stinking leaves, hitting his upper back. It turned out that several monsters actually circled around a mountain from the other side of the island, jumped down from above, and pounced on Zuyun. At the same time, the monsters on the beach suddenly accelerated towards Zuyun. There are wolves in front of him, tigers in the back, and enemies from both sides. Even if Zuyun's footwork in the immortal art is ghostly, he still can't find a place to stay. He suddenly blasted the Firebird talisman towards the monsters attacking in front of him, drew out his long sword, and planned to use the sword energy to kill one. When he got a chance to breathe, he suddenly felt the temperature around him suddenly drop. Those monster beasts that pounced down slowly solidified into ice. When it landed, it had turned into several huge ice sculptures. In the blink of an eye, it fell to pieces and ice shards flew everywhere. He was overjoyed and looked towards the cave. He saw Sun Qinyang holding an ice blue sword in her hand, and she was posing as if she was releasing her sword energy. Seeing Zuyun looking at her, he turned around and smiled, "Zuyun, I saved your life."